California, 1970s, a land of sunshine, palm trees, and quiet suburban neighborhoods where families believed they were safe behind closed doors.
Until the night began to whisper something darker. It didn't start with chaos or headlines. It started with silence.
I saw it again. Something moved over there. And the door. I know I locked it. A feeling, impossible to explain, that someone had been there, watching, waiting. At first, people dismissed it.
A misplaced object. A strange noise. But then the reports began to grow.
And yet nothing obvious was stolen. It was as if the intruder wasn't there for valuables, but for something far more disturbing. He was studying them, learning their lives piece by piece, mapping their routines, understanding their fears before they even knew they had one. This was the beginning of a terror that would evolve, adapt, and spread across California for more than a decade.
Before the world would know him as the Golden State Killer, he had already been watching from the shadows, perfecting his methods,
becoming something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. He entered homes at night with a patience that defied logic, slipping through windows, unlocking doors, moving through darkness like he belonged there. And once inside, he didn't always act immediately.
Sometimes he waited for hours, hiding in closets, behind doors, or in the black corners of rooms, listening to the quiet breathing of sleeping victims.
I saw it, the connections, every single detail I was missing. It all makes sense now.
A sudden burst of light. A voice cutting through the silence. Panic. Confusion.
He controlled every second, every movement, every sound. His attacks followed a chilling pattern. He targeted couples, binding them with precision, separating them psychologically before physically. The dishes on his back, they hold the weight,
as a cruel warning that even the smallest movement could mean death. It wasn't just violence. It was domination.
Psychological terror designed to break his victims long before he ever touched them, and what followed was something that would leave scars, far deeper than anything visible. Trauma that would echo through the rest of their lives, long after the night itself had ended. Between 1974 and 1986, this man committed a staggering number of crimes, at least 13 murders,
each one carefully executed. Each one leaving behind fragments of fear but almost no trace of the man responsible.
Communities began to change. People installed locks, alarms, security lights. Neighbors formed watch groups. Guns were kept close at night, but none of it stopped him. Because he wasn't random, he was calculated, he adapted. When law enforcement began to understand his patterns, he changed them. When pressure increased in one area, he disappeared, only to resurface somewhere else. It was as if he was always one step ahead. The system worked, and in a chilling twist, he did.
As time passed, his crimes escalated. The fear deep series of break-ins.
And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. No final clue, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. The case grew cold. Years passed, then decades. Victims tried to rebuild their lives, carrying memories they could never erase. Families of those who had been murdered lived with unanswered questions, with grief that had no closure. And somewhere out there,
the man responsible lived freely, blending into society, becoming invisible in the most terrifying way possible, not by hiding, but by appearing completely normal.
As the world moved into a new era, technology began to change everything. DNA, once a limited and experimental tool, became one of the most powerful forces in criminal investigation. Old evidence, once thought useless, suddenly held new potential.
And in the case of the Golden State Killer, that evidence had been preserved, waiting silently for the moment when science would be advanced enough to understand it.
Investigators returned to the case with fresh eyes and new tools, extracting a DNA profile from decades-old samples. But there was a problem. The DNA didn't match anyone in criminal databases. It was as if the killer had never been caught, never been arrested, never existed in any system that could identify him. For many cases, this would have been the end of the road. But this time, investigators took a different path, one that had never been used on such a scale before. Instead of searching for the killer directly,
they searched for his family. Using public genealogy databases, platforms where ordinary people uploaded their DNA to learn about their ancestry.
Investigators entered the unknown profile and waited. It was a long shot, a risk. But then, something appeared. A partial match. Not the killer himself, but someone who shared his bloodline. A distant relative. It was the first real break in decades. From that single connection, investigators began building an enormous family tree, tracing generations, mapping relationships, narrowing possibility. It was painstaking work, requiring patience, precision, and an understanding that one mistake could send them in the wrong direction entirely.
Thousands of names became hundreds, hundreds became dozens, and eventually, one name stood out. A man who fit the timeline.
A man who had lived in the right places at the right times. A man whose past held a detail that sent chills through investigators. He had once been a police officer. On the surface, his life appeared ordinary. He lived in a quiet neighborhood. He had a family. He blended in seamlessly, the kind of person no one would look at twice. But beneath that normal exterior, investigators believed they had finally found the man. Still, belief wasn't enough. They needed proof.
So they began surveillance, watching him carefully, waiting for an opportunity. They didn't confront him. They didn't alert him.
They waited for something simple, something he would discard without thinking. A piece of trash, a tissue, anything that carried his DNA. And eventually that moment came. Investigators collected the discarded item, tested it, and compared the results to the DNA from the crime scenes. The match was undeniable. After more than 40 years, the shadow had a name, a face, a life that could no longer hide behind anonymity.
On April 24, 2018, officers moved in. They surrounded his home, closing in on a man who had once been unstoppable.
But there was no dramatic escape, no violent confrontation, just a quiet arrest. A 72-year-old man taken into custody. The years had changed his appearance, but not erased the past that had finally caught up with him. When he was confronted, for decades, I kept it buried. But now, it's time to acknowledge the truth. He showed one face to the world, but there was a darkness beneath. He had committed unspeakable acts.
In 2020, he stood in court, no longer a mystery, no longer a shadow. Victims faced him, some speaking through tears, others through strength.
All carrying the weight of what he had done. He pleaded guilty, avoiding the death penalty, but ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in prison, with no chance of parole, no chance of escape. But even with his capture, the story doesn't end in a simple sense of closure. Because this case is about more than one man. It's about time. About the way the truth can hide for decades and still find its way to the surface. DNA does not forget. It does not lose its memory. It waits, quietly, until the world is ready to understand it.
The capture of the Golden State Killer didn't just solve one of the most infamous cases in American history. It changed the future of criminal investigations.
Opening doors to solving cold cases that had long been considered impossible. Cases once buried in evidence rooms, forgotten by time, had a chance to be reopened, re-examined, and perhaps finally solved. And yet, beneath that sense of progress lies something deeply unsettling. For more than 30 years, this man lived freely, surrounded by ordinary people who had no idea who he really was. He smiled. He spoke. He existed as if nothing had ever happened. And that reality leaves behind a question that lingers long after the story ends.
How many others are still out there, living ordinary lives, hiding behind normal faces, waiting, unseen?
Because while the Golden State Killer was finally caught, the fear he created never truly disappeared. It remains, not just in the memories of those who lived through it, but in the understanding that sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones hiding in the darkness, but the ones standing in plain sight, blending into the world so perfectly that no one ever sees them coming.